made to give the impression that this horrible story happened on President Biden's watch. No, Shannon, look, I very specifically said, and this is what President Biden did during his first 100 days. Joining our conversation, former RNC spokesman and host of the Bullard podcast, Tim Miller's here. Joining us at the table, former Democratic Congresswoman and MSNBC political analyst Donna Everidge is here. Basil's still with us. I mean, look, Tim, when you are, and I hate quoting the old rules of politics because I know every day I relearn it every day. It's like getting kicked in the side of the head that all the old rules are gone. But when you're in a whole stop digging, just say, yeah. I mean, she was responding to Joe Biden's State of the Union. Of course, she meant to imply that it was his fault.
Yeah, and then the first words that were out there is Joe Biden. You know, look, I do think the old rules of politics do apply to some people, and I think the gravity is applying to Katie Britt. You know, even in MAGA media world, folks were dumbfounded by her performance, less the substance, because they don't care as much about the substance and the facts, but, you know, just the fact that it was so phony, right? And to use this woman, call it Jacinto's story, right? And to do it in such a performative and fake performative manner to try to make a political point, when none of the underlying facts supported your political point, it's just so gross, you know. And the thing to me, Nicole, I mentioned that, like, sometimes we have to live in this fantasy world, but it's just, you could imagine a Republican rebuttal from the early 2000s, or a Democratic rebuttal, maybe 90 Democrats, that says, hey, you know, we need to be concerned about the people at the border. We need to be concerned about their humanity, but we also, you know, need to have stricter border security. We need to make changes to put in more enforcement, and that President Biden hasn't been aggressive enough. Like, you can imagine a substantive response that is both compassionate and addresses an actual issue, a policy issue. These Republicans aren't capable of that. All you get is just unabashed cruelty from Donald Trump, planning mass deportations in camps, and then putting out somebody like Katie Britt to try to paper over that and put this kind of sheen of this phony sheen of compassion on top of his cruelty, with no substance behind it. It's just totally fabricated lies. And the whole thing is pretty pathetic. And I guess the only thing that is encouraging is it seems like the backlash against her has come from all corners. So maybe this is one time when political gravity will apply.
I guess the problem, though, Donna, is that the lie is always heard around the world, and the cleanup doesn't make it as far. And I thought one of the strongest parts of Biden's speech was when the Republican senators had gone through about the border section. The truth and the facts are that Joe Biden gave Republicans just about everything that they wanted in a border bill. Joe Biden actually got farther than my old boss, both my old bosses, McCain and Bush, the President Obama. I mean, he got farther toward a bipartisan deal than any recent president. I think that holds up going back at least the previous two administrations. And Republicans killed it because Trump called them and told them to. The only people to blame for the chaos at the border are the people who listen to Donald Trump and Donald Trump.
Well, that was the real danger in what Katie Britt said, because here she was laying a false story at the feet of Joe Biden at the same time that she joined with her Republican colleagues and killed the border security bill. I mean, she was actually part of the group, at least in the Congress group, that negotiated the bill, and she joined in killing it. And so, you know, Joe Biden said in that speech, are you going to fight about it or are you going to fix it? And clearly, Republicans are going to fight about it. They want to fight for 2024 and for the election, and they've gotten the fight, except that the tables have turned. And then by Katie Britt, and this bizarre story that never happened and she never cleaned it up. And so this idea that somehow she cleaned up a lot actually wasn't true, because she never cleaned it up at all. She still suggested that it was at the feet and the hands of Biden policies that resulted in that really horrible story. And, you know, the Republicans really don't have a leg to stand on when they actually have the upper hand when it came to the fight on immigration. They don't have that at all.
I think that's right. I mean, SNL is so brilliant. And, you know, they're really onto something when they can hew so closely to the fact. And they did that with great effect with Sarah Palin's actual answers in interviews. In this story, again, this is actually what happened. She tells the story, wrong year, wrong president, wrong country.
And one wonders why she would do that. Is she just not smart enough, or the people that wrote the text of it just not paying attention? And, you know, and I actually just want to call attention to the substance, because she said it because it works. The fear that she's engendered by making that point works, not with us, but certainly with a core group of MAGA supporters. And just to take something from Donald Trump's speech to Georgia on immigration, go to the closet.
Yeah, of course.
He calls immigrants an agony of our people, the plunder of our cities, sacking our own towns, violating our citizens, the conquest of our country. And when you listen to language like that, you know, I think about a 1915 movie called Birth of a Nation, which portrayed African Americans as hypersexual and violent, and to the rescue of American virtue was the KKK. Now, it is very clear that there are differences between African Americans and immigrants and migrants in this country. The through line, however, is the way in which white supremacists are viewed as being virtuous. And when Donald Trump starts calling out white supremacists, tasking them implicitly or explicitly, the bullets from those guns don't care about your backstory. And my concern is that even though we can, and there has been fun poked at that speech, no question about it, traditional politics would tell you that she should have created a clear alternative to what Joe Biden was saying, and she absolutely did not do that. But they use that story because that story works. That story is a proxy for fear, and the concern is that it will metastasize in a way that goes well beyond the joke.
And Basil, we should add to your list poisoning the blood, because that's what that is about. And look, let's not let Katie Britt off the hook. She's an attorney, she's a United States senator, and she should just know better.
Yeah.
Do you remember when the right wing freaked out about Bud Light? They really freaked out about Bud Light. They were shooting Bud Light cans. The right was very, very, very upset about Bud Light. They were so mad. In Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis got so excited about it, he ordered an official Florida state investigation into Bud Light. In Congress, House Republicans started their own federal congressional investigation of Bud Light. They have spent the better part of the past year on this. No longer would everyone in the country see Bud Light as the beer that is slightly more flavorful than Coors Light, but not quite as flavorful as Miller Lite. But the Bud Light blue is kind of a pretty color, and sometimes it's on sale, so sometimes you buy it even if you're not in love with it, because no one's really in love with it. And hey, if you're drinking light beer, no one expects to be in love with that stuff anyway. I mean, that's how we all used to think about Bud Light. But after nearly a year of right-wing culture war, no holds barred demagoguery against Bud Light, no longer would any self-respecting right-winger, would any self-respecting Republican buy Bud Light because it was on the end cap and came with a free koozie? No. Over the course of just under a year, Bud Light was transformed from a normal American thing you don't think much about into something very, very big, something you could shoot on sight. Former President Donald Trump, of course, jumped on board. Money does talk. Anheuser-Busch now understands that. Said in a post promoting right-wing of companies that were seen to be liberal or liberal theming, or maybe if you squinted, they might feel a little liberal, but you're not sure why. Bud Light, over the course of this past year, became a conservative target, became a Trump world boogeyman. Until Donald Trump did a total 180. Out of the blue, he decided unilaterally to call off the right-wing Jeremiah against Bud Light. He told all his followers to start drinking Bud Light again. Quote, Anheuser-Busch is a great American brand that deserves a second chance. Now, what caused this radical U-turn? What caused the former president to turn on a dime like this? The word dime is a help in this question. If you put that Trump post back up there, the one where he says everybody should go back to drinking Bud Light, look at the time and date stamp on that one. Can we actually just make that part of it a little bigger? Let's see the stamp. Yeah, there we go. All right, so keep that in mind. 3:30 p.m. on February 6th. Why is that when Trump did his 180-degree U-turn on Bud Light? Oh, look what happened that same day. Lobbyist for Anheuser-Busch announces $10,000 a plate fundraiser for Donald Trump. So at 9:47 a.m., the lobbyist for Anheuser-Busch announces a $10,000 a plate fundraiser for Trump, 9:47 a.m. That same day at 3:30 p.m., Trump announces that he has changed his mind on Bud Light and conservatives should all drink Bud Light again. That fundraiser was announced on February 6th. It was actually held last week, Wednesday last week, but all Anheuser-Busch had to do was announce they were going to do the fundraiser to get Trump to do what they wanted, to get Trump to call off what had been a years-long conservative culture war top-line issue. Would you like the head of the Republican Party and the Republican Party's next nominee to be president of the United States to do something for you? Is there something you would like him to do for you or your company? Perhaps you would consider opening your checkbook and swiveling your wrist. Because that's apparently what it took to end the great right-wing Bud Light freakout of 2023 and 2024. one fundraiser. That's how that one sort of ended in fiasco. But now, behold, here comes the same process again. Last week, end of last week, something happened in Washington that almost never happens anymore. There was a vote in Congress. This was an actual policy, and it's even on a somewhat controversial issue. Nevertheless, the vote on this bill last week in Congress was 50 to nothing. Now, this bill is on the issue of TikTok, social media app. And whatever you think of TikTok, or whether you think of TikTok at all, there have been bipartisan concerns that have been expressed for a long time that this very popular social media app could pose a threat in the United States because of links between the company that owns TikTok and the Chinese government. I say there are widespread concerns about this. These have been manifest already in policy at lots of different levels. Already, if you are a federal government employee or contractor, if for work you have a phone or another device that belongs to the federal government says you are not allowed to install TikTok on that device. In more than 30 states, there are similar bans on installing TikTok on any device that belongs to the state government. This bill that's racing through Congress would require app stores to remove TikTok. So you can't download the app anymore. The only contingency would be if a company was sold to a firm that didn't have links to the Chinese government, that didn't have links to Beijing. Barring the company that runs TikTok being sold, TikTok would effectively be off the market. When Trump was president in the summer of 2020, he tried to ban TikTok unilaterally himself. He tried to he issued an executive order banning any American any company that owns TikTok, which effectively would have banned the use of TikTok by anyone in the United States. He tried that. He did that in the summer of 2020. That executive order was eventually struck down by the courts, which is why TikTok is not banned right now. But Trump was very clear on this. He made a huge issue out of TikTok being evil and bad and dangerous. It had to be stopped. He was going to stop it. That was his stand. Until something happened. Do we have that? Do we have that cash register sound? Did you guys find that? Oh, suddenly he's just made a total U-turn. I wonder why. After personally trying to ban TikTok, after railing against it and playing Mr. Trump guy against TikTok for years, trying to shut down this app in the United States, Trump has just come out and said, actually, we shouldn't get rid of TikTok. That would be terrible. TikTok's actually got a lot going for it. He said so online on Thursday, and now today he said it in an interview on CNBC.
There are a lot of people on TikTok that love it. There are a lot of young kids on TikTok who will go crazy without it. There are a lot of users. There's a lot of good.
It's a lot of good. All of a sudden, why the change? Quote, some have noted that Trump recently hosted Jeff Yass at his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. Yass is a billionaire investor in ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, and Trump is seeking his support in the presidential race. So follow the bouncing coin, if you will. Notice nearby man. He has a $33 billion, 15% stake in that company. Step 3, need money desperately. Step 4, announce new stance, very much in favor of the same foreign company you used to oppose, while blinking one's eyelashes at the man you just noticed. Step 5, if you would like the head of the Republican Party and the Republican Party's next nominee to be president of the United States to do something for you or your company, open checkbook, swivel wrist. Anything is possible. And if you don't believe me, take it from Trump's own folks. This is the headline in Newsweek right now. So Steve Bannon suggests Donald Trump has been bought. Steve Bannon, former advisor to Donald Trump, suggested on Saturday that the former president was paid off after a shift in his stance on TikTok. When even Steve Bannon is like, ooh, this guy appears to be for sale. Steve Bannon right now has been sentenced to prison for a massive... Steve Bannon has been sentenced to prison and is out of prison while his appeal is pending. Steve Bannon has been put up on charges and had to be pardoned by Trump for an alleged massive fraud scheme. Steve Bannon is going to be charged for that alleged massive fraud scheme in New York State court. And Steve Bannon is like, seems a little transactional, I don't know. This guy appears to be for sale. If Steve Bannon is saying you appear to be a little fraudy, a little for sale, a little transactional, that means you have ceased to be subtle about it. There's a lot that is going on in Republican politics right now, which is not the way things usually go in politics. There's a lot of overlap between, like, crime and politics, prison and politics. But as Politico.com reports tonight on the, quote, bloodbath at the RNC, with Trump's people finally taking over as of this weekend, and now as of today, they are firing dozens of people who work at the Republican National Committee, with confirmation that there is no longer even an effort to stop the Republican National Committee from paying Trump's personal legal expenses out of the Republican Party coffers. We are in a place where the entire Republican Party apparatus is merging with Trump's personal legal defense apparatus. And the way he has been behaving when it comes to being transactional at his time of most desperate financial need puts us, no matter how you think of Trump, no matter whether you support him or not, no matter whether you care about politics or not, it puts us, the American people, in a radically fragile place when it comes to what exactly is for sale in our country and from our government. I mean, Bud Light and TikTok seem to have figured out very early on where exactly you receive your content. But if anything is for sale, right? If everything is for sale, what makes you think it's going to stop with thin beer and Chinese social media apps? Everything must go. Everything's for sale. Anybody who can pay can get what they want. I wonder why guys like this always want to undermine the rule of law.
You have no doubt seen this iconic photo. It is the integration of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas on September 4th, 1957. The young woman screaming with that twisted, hateful look on her face is Hazel Bryan, who was a student at Little Rock High at the time and an anti-integration activist. The student being screamed at is Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine, who integrated the school under the protection of the National Guard. Well, here's a fun fact that anti-racism educator Tim Wise pointed out on his ex-Twitter account. This is a promo pic for the TV show Leave It to Beaver, a much-beloved program, especially for white conservatives who view it as a nostalgic representation of family life and the ultimate example of a more innocent time. But here's the thing. Leave It to Beaver premiered on October 4th, 1957, 1 month to the day after that photo from Little Rock was taken. America was not innocent, and the evil wasn't only in the heart of Hazel Bryan or other Little Rock whites. It was a national sickness, one most whites didn't know. It's aired Leave It to Beaver about a quote-unquote typical American family and the mishaps of their youngest son Theodore, a.k.a. the Beaver, as his older brother Wally and his typical suburban parents, Ward and June Cleaver, try to get him out of scripts. And it debuted during a time of tremendous racial and gender upheaval in America. World War I and especially World War II had put a fire under millions of Black Americans as Black men came home from serving in Europe with newfound urgency to secure their rights here. The Korean War followed in 1950, prolonging the workforce disruption that had pushed many white women out of the kitchen and into jobs to replace their war-fighting husbands. Meanwhile, the Civil Rights Movement was winning epic court battles, culminating in Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, which ordered the integration of American schools, meaning white families faced the prospect of their kids going to school with Black children, and many weren't happy about it. Hence the images of white moms and students screaming at Black students as they entered all-white schools. For affluent white women, the disruptions were stark. They watched their housemates refuse to board the buses and come to work in Alabama for a whole year in 1955. Black women were often leaving domestic service altogether to also take industrial jobs during the wars or insisting on registering to vote. Many middle-class white women, meanwhile, particularly those who had gotten jobs during the war, found that they weren't exactly eager to go back to packing lunches and cleaning up after their husbands. So the fight was on to make them go back and give back the independence that earning their own money rather than relying on an allowance had produced. Post-war Hollywood enlisted itself in the project of reasserting normalcy in American society. TV shows portrayed happy housewives completely fulfilled by the task of keeping little Beaver out of trouble and making sure Ward had his dinner on time. The folks at the Museum of Food and Culture write, quote, marketing efforts of the 1950s sold the idea of a one that is efficient, spends money wisely, makes food from scratch, always keeps the house clean, and make it all look effortless. Oh, and does all of this while looking gorgeous. And the promotion of this pristine domestic image and women who are fulfilled as housewives is pushed from all angles. Women's magazines featuring household products, the process of employment, the mystery, banking rules, assumptions and judgments, television shows, like Leave It to Beaver, The Donna Reed Show, Ozzie and Harriet, and more. But change was coming, whether the men of Hollywood, Madison Avenue, and Main Street liked it or not. All the Tupperware parties, kitchen gadget, and girdle commercials in the world weren't going to stop women who wanted their own money, meaningful work, or access to birth control, which came via a Supreme Court decision in 1972. The right to abortion, which came via Roe v. Wade in 1973. It's women's right to form an abandonment without being offended, which women couldn't do until 1974. Here's something I didn't mention at the top. Leave It to Beaver, that emblematic archetype of the 1950s, actually wasn't a hit at the time. It never cracked the top 30 TV programs throughout its initial TV run, and only became popular as a cult classic rerun in the 1980s, when it was more of a parody than an aspirational show. The top shows in the actual 1950s included The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show, which showed a married couple who were biggery equals. It portrayed another real-life marriage between a feisty comedian, Lucille Ball, and a Latino actor named Beth. Disruptive rather than blissful one. The changes in what women expected from the world, it turns out, were irreversible. But getting rid of control, particularly women, has been the project of the dominant economic class since the 1950s, and it accelerated during the 1970s, when an impressive woman named Phyllis Schlafly led the conservative cause, convincing women that what they really wanted wasn't to the Constitution. No. It was good old-fashioned domesticity. Katie Britt is in the Phyllis Schlafly tradition, an Alabama lawyer and United States senator who would have you believe that she's nothing more than a happy housewife, much like Schlafly was an author and powerful public figure. The goal? To sell women on giving up their hard-won rights and freedoms so that the men can be back in charge. Their vehicle? It's called the tradwife trend. My guest and I will explain what that is after the break.
I am a proud wife and mom of 2 school-aged kids. I'm worried about their future and the future of children in every corner of our nation. And that's why I invited you into our home tonight.
That was Alabama Senator Katie Britt, a lawyer and former chief of staff to her Senate predecessor, talking up her qualifications in last week's Republican response to the president's State of the Union address. Or, as her Alabama colleague Tommy Tuberville put it, she was picked as a housewife, not just as a senator. Joining me now is Molly Jong-Fast, Vanity Fair special correspondent and MSNBC contributor, and Olivia Troy, former senior advisor to Vice President Mike Pence and executive director of the gun safety group 97%. Thank you both for being here. Olivia, I do want to go to you first, because you are a conservative. I don't know if you're still in the party, but you came from the Republican Party initially. What did you make of it? Because a lot of Republicans hated it. A lot of Republicans gave it very bad reviews. What did you make of her presentation?
I was horrified. I mean, I sat there in shock. First of all, I mean, you couldn't ignore the kitchen setting. And I kept thinking, this is how they're going to court women. They already have a problem with women in the Republican Party. And you choose to put a female senator in the kitchen to deliver probably the most important speech she's giving of her career to date. Right. And so I thought it was ridiculous. I also thought it was a slap in the face to conservative women. I mean, I just thought they made a mockery out of her, that they chose this rising star, as she's been called in the GOP. She was well respected. And instead, this thing was a ridiculously breezy, whatever the heck that was, and her tone and the way she kind of spoke through it, while she wore a cross, but yet her shirt was unbuttoned. I mean, it was tragic on so many ways and so insulting, honestly. I just sat there in disbelief.
There was so much about it as I was watching it, Molly. It was giving, Serena Joy Green blouse. It was giving very dramatic. And also just the fact that she actually was one of the people who negotiated the very conservative immigration bill that got tanked. She and Langford worked on that together. She actually has an accomplishment she could have talked about. She didn't. But what she did show us, I think, and I'd love for you to explain this a little bit, because you know what the youngins are doing out there on the socials. To me, she was giving the tradwife trend, which I'm not sure if people are familiar with it, but if you could explain what that is, because that to me is what she was trying to give.
Well, so this is the idea that it's housewifery in this current century. It's the idea that you're a mother and that you do things, but it's sort of exaggerated. Like you do things like you grind your own flour and you make your own bread and you homeschool your kids it's very kind of exaggerated. And the idea here is to push women into the kitchen, right? And what I think is so interesting about watching her was that you really saw policy-wise, it's very hard to defend a lot of this stuff, right? Like you've got Republicans, abortion, you've got women who are, having miscarriages being sent to parking lots to wait until they're sick enough to get treatment. You have, states trying to ban IUDs and the morning after pill and saying they're going to come after birth control. So it's very hard as a woman to defend these policies. And so you find her, telling a sex trafficking story about something that happened in Mexico during the Bush administration.
Well, and her beliefs on abortion means that if that same story happened today, she would expect, if that victim got pregnant, she would expect them to give birth. And she gave that horrible story, and I wanted to yell through the TV, yes, ma'am. That's why people want to have a rape and incest exception at minimum. Because if a 12-year-old had that happen to them, Katie Britt would say, you got to have the baby. Let me play one more thing, because there's another person, Olivia, who's doing this game too, of trying to attract women in weird ways. Here's Nancy Mace defending her support for Donald Trump to George Stephanopoulos.
You're trying to shame me this morning.
I'm just
and I find it offensive, and this is why women won't come forward.
Women won't come forward because they're defamed by those who perpetrate rape.
They are judged and they're shamed, and you're trying to shame me this morning. I think it's disgusting.
I'm not shaming you at all.
I told my story. It took me 25 years to tell my story. I was judged for it. I still get judged for it today.
I'm asking you a very simple question.